Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. And this has been such a great event so far, such a great venue, so many great talks. I'm so excited to be here. Also, the stage with the logos and everything. I'm just very excited. I'm so glad to be here. As we just mentioned, my name's Oliver Dunk. I'm a developer relations engineer on the Google Chrome team. So I get to just really sort of geek out about extensions, learn as much as I can about them, and then talk to developers like yourselves to share what I've learned, get feedback, and bring that to the team. And today what I want to do is take a look at some of the UI surfaces that extensions make available to you so that you can learn how you might use them in your next project. Now, before we get started, I want to get to know all of you a little bit. So I thought we'd do a little bit of audience interaction. If we could maybe get the lights up just so I can see everyone. It's very hard to see everybody when it's so dark. Cool, I can see you a lot better now. So I'm curious, if you'd consider yourself more of a designer, maybe put your hand up. OK, so maybe half, maybe less than I expected, actually. If you'd consider yourself more of an engineer. Wow, OK. I heard that this was a UI conference that maybe more engineers were starting to attend, but I wasn't expecting so many engineers. That's awesome. But hopefully we'll have a little bit for everyone today. I think we can bring the lights back down again now. My goal is, if you're a UI designer, that you'll take away some ideas for products that you could build and different UI surfaces where you might expose an entry point to your product. And then if you're an engineer, perhaps you'll learn about some things you can build and realize that if you already have some basic knowledge of technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that you can build an extension yourself. And that's a tool that you already have in your tool set, even if you didn't realize. So I want to start with a bit of a story. I wasn't always a web developer or an extension developer. There was a time where I had no idea how to build a website. It was something that I was very curious about. And I remember going to school one day, and the teacher told us that we were going to build websites today. And I was really excited. I was like, I'm finally going to get to learn how to do this. And then the teacher told us which application we were going to open. And you might have some guesses as to what application you think it might be. I guarantee you'll be completely wrong. So maybe you're thinking Dreamweaver or Notepad. No, we opened the spreadsheet application that we had installed in our computers. And it was actually quite an ingenious lesson idea. So what we would do was we'd drag and drop some images, and you can arrange those sort of independent of the layout of the cell and the table. So you can sort of do some design. And then you can have buttons that link between the worksheets, and so you're sort of getting the concept of pages. And then you can even have tables for interactivity, so you can go quite far. But even at that point, back in school, I knew in the back of my mind, this can't be how websites are built. Maybe there are some applications that are built this way, but this really doesn't feel like the way websites are built. And so it sort of felt like this meme, if you've ever seen it before. It was I was asking Mum if we could make websites, and she was saying, we have everything we need at home. The teacher in this case is Mum. And then the tools that we had at home was some sheets. I tried making example.com. I think I'd have actually been pretty proud of myself if I was to look at this 10, 20 years ago. But clearly, this isn't how you build websites. So then I discovered HTML. And that was really exciting because all of a sudden, I felt like I'd unlocked this new skill. I suddenly knew how to do something that I couldn't do before. And all of a sudden, I was starting to see the solution to problems with this new technology. I suddenly realized that thing that I do to sort of organize my life, I could do that better if I just built a web app to go along with that. Or that idea I have for a product, I could solve that by building a website. And so that's the gift that I want to give to you today for extensions. I want to give you sort of a brief tour of what extensions can do and how you can use them. And then hopefully the next time you're solving a personal problem, you might realize, oh, I can actually make this website easier to use if I just built an extension for that. Or maybe even the next time you're building a new product or working on the product that your company already builds, you realize, oh, an extension would be a really great place to build this feature. So I did want to briefly touch on exactly what I'm going to talk about today. I've sort of used the term Chrome extensions and web extensions interchangeably. And so I want to clarify why I'm doing that. So Chrome extensions, as you might be able to guess, is what we call extensions within Chrome. But Chrome extensions are built on the common set of web extension APIs, and those are supported across browsers. So other than a couple of things, everything that I'm going to show you today is supported in Chrome, it's supported in Firefox, in Safari, and Edge. And so if you choose to build an extension, then you can ship that to users regardless of the browser that they're using. And then once you've built that extension, you can publish it to the various stores that are available. So this is the Chrome Web Store. So this is where you can download extensions and themes for Chrome. And other browsers have similar stores. And one of the really great things is that these stores have their own user bases already. So even if you don't have an existing user base, this is a way you can reach new users and get your product in front of them. So to get started, I want to take a really quick look at a basic extension and what you could do with it. So all extensions have one required file. That's the manifest.json file. If you're familiar with JavaScript and JSON, hopefully this doesn't look too daunting. You can probably guess the meaning of a lot of the keys. So the name key is just the name of the extension, so the browser can show it in the UI. You have the manifest version, which is the version of the extension APIs that we're building on top of. And then, in this case, I have this content scripts key, which isn't required, but says that every time the user visits example.com, I want to inject this content.js file. And this can be a file that contains whatever you like. So in this case, I've just put like a hello world console log. And then anytime the user visits example.com, that script will run. And you might have noticed that that's really powerful, because generally when you're building a website, you're constrained to the website you've built, to the origin that you're working on. So if you've built a note-taking application, then you can add whatever feature you like to it. But you can't add any features of your own to Google Docs, for example, because you didn't build that. But with extensions, you can just come up with one little tweak or one additional thing that your product could do, and you can build that on top of extensions, on top of websites that the user is already using. So this is really powerful. And so I want to show you a couple of things that you could do with this. First of all, password managers are a really popular type of extension. So you can save passwords directly in Chrome's built-in password manager, but maybe you're using different browsers or different devices, and so you might choose to store it in a third-party password manager. And when you do this, you still want to be able to fill your credentials. So what password management extensions do is, using that same content script support, they inject a script on every website you visit. And they're then waiting to see when you focus an input field, and when you do, they can show some suggestions. So you imagine here we might be on a login form, and then the user goes ahead and clicks in the username field, and then you get some suggestions as to credentials that you have saved in your password manager that you'd fill. And then when you go ahead and click on a suggestion, you can just use some basic JavaScript to update the value of that field. And you've built a product that works across the web, which is really exciting. Something else you could do is showing a sort of overlay. So showing some additional context. Maybe a user's reading some text and they don't know the definition of a certain word. Well, you could have an extension that detects when the user selects some text and then shows a little tooltip with the definition. I didn't sort of build out the UI here. This is very simple. But you could imagine how you could show a definition of a word here, maybe have a little audio icon to show how to pronounce the word. This is actually something Google has a dictionary extension that does just this. But everything I've shown so far is within web pages. And that's a really powerful way to use extensions. But I want to also show you some other contexts and some other places where you can have UI. So for that, I think I'm actually going to jump out of my slides. I've been lying to you a little bit. All of my slides are actually running in Chrome Canary. So we're going to jump around the browser for some of the next slides. So first of all, I want to show you the side panel. This is something which Chrome has had for a few years. Back last year, we introduced this as a surface where extensions can show UI. And so you can see in this case, the user took an interaction. In my case, it was just clicking on the slides. And then this UI appears. And within this UI, you can show some additional context on the page. So let me show you a couple of examples as to what you might do. One example is very similar to that dictionary extension I just showed you. You could actually show the definition of a word. So maybe rather than having a tooltip, if the user has a word that they're not sure the definition of, they can go ahead and click on define words. And so this is actually another thing extensions can do using the APIs that they have access to, where they can add context menu items, and that's another entry point into your product. And then when I go ahead and click define word, you can see the definition of the word appears in the side panel. Now this was the first side panel extension I built when we were first introducing this API. One of my favorite use cases of the side panel is actually something that one of my colleagues, Sebastian, built. So if we go ahead and move on to this, the idea behind this is that it gives you an AI-generated summary of the article you're reading. So if you have a long article, but you don't want to read the entire article, then you can go ahead and just open the side panel and see a brief summary. And I'll show you a little bit of how this works. We won't go into full detail. So if you want to see the full code, maybe download this and try it for yourself, you can do. All of the code is on GitHub in our Chrome extension samples repository. But I'll show you sort of a brief whirlwind tour of some of the things that are going on here. So first of all, we're using this readability library that Mozilla publishes. From what I understand, this is actually what they use for the reader mode functionality in Firefox. And what this allows you to do is to take a document and parse it and extract the main article body, which sounds like something that maybe would be easy to do in JavaScript, but it can actually get quite complicated because the website's going to have a header and a footer and some sidebars and maybe some ads. And so figuring out like what's the actual text that I should even be summarizing is a non-trivial problem. And so this library allows us to do that. Once you run that code, you get a little JSON object that looks like this. And you see you have the text content, some extra data like the site name if it was able to identify that. And this is then a really great starting point to summarize the text. But how do we actually do the summary? Well, for this, we can use some of the new built-in AI APIs that Chrome has been investigating. These are all experimental APIs, so I want to be clear that these aren't shipping yet. You can't use these APIs in a product that you actually ship to users. But we're in a stage where we're starting to get feedback from developers and sort of get an idea for what's possible to build. So what we can actually do is use this window.ai.summarizer API, and then we check that the API is available because the API relies on a large language model that might not be downloaded. So there's some additional boilerplate code that I haven't shown here where you sort of wait for the model to be downloaded, maybe show some like a loading spinner or something to the user. But then once you know that the summarization session is available, we can get the text content using that function we just wrote. We can call session.summarize with the text. And then we can go ahead and update our summary element, so sort of this section here, and display the summary. And so this actually isn't running live, but this is the output that I got when I ran that article through the summarizer. So you can see how this creates a much shorter summary that the user could read. I do want to just touch on some of the other APIs that we have. So behind a flag, we have this summarizer API and some other APIs. And then actually behind an origin trial in extensions, which means that for a limited time, you can actually ship this to users, but you need to be aware that it's still experimental and might go away in the future. You can use this prompt API, which provides a more sort of traditional prompt-based LLM interface where you can, like, the user can ask a question and you get a response back. As I said, these are all experimental, so if you're interested, I'd encourage you to go to this page, developer.chrome.com/docs/extensions/AI. There you can find out how to use the origin trial for the prompt API, and also how to register for the preview program where you can try some of the other APIs that are still behind a flag. But we have a little bit more time, so I want to go into a little bit more detail about that prompt API I mentioned. So as I mentioned, you can register for this, and it's available for a limited time. So currently between Chrome 131 and 136 until October 2025. And so the way this works is you register, you give some information about the extension that you want to use this API in, and then you get given a token. And then you can take that token and you can add it to your manifest. So you add this trial tokens key, you add the token that you've been given, and then you also need a permission just to sort of enable the API. So there's this AI language model origin trial permission, which is a bit of a tongue twister, but the idea is just to make it really clear that, hey, this is experimental. If you're using this, please be careful to take that into account. And I want to show you that in practice, but I think actually none of the UI services that we're using so far are the best place to show you this. So I'm actually going to move on to the pop-up. And so if I do this, you can see the pop-up. And so this is another UI surface that extensions have access to. You may have come across this in the past. And this is sort of a place where you can show some information that the user might be sort of using temporarily. They're switching away from the website and switching to the extension, and then they want to go back to the website they're looking at in the future. And so this can sort of, it can disappear quite easily. If you click away, it disappears. So it's not quite as persistent as the side panel, but it's a slightly larger surface. It's nicer to switch into temporarily. The way you use this, let's just zoom out a little bit, is very similar. So in our manifest, rather than having any of the other keys I've shown you, you have this action key. And that's sort of adding this extension icon in the top. And then what you're saying is that you want the title to be open popup when you hover over this, and that you want it to open this popup.html when you click on the action icon. And so what you're seeing here is that popup.html file. And just to re-emphasize there, this is all just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're not using any other languages here. And so one thing that we've seen a lot of people build with the popup, especially with these new APIs that are available, is sort of chat interfaces where you're interacting with either a model that's running on the device or a model that's running on a server. Actually, for this sort of text interaction, using a server-side model is currently often the best choice because you want a slightly more powerful model. You want to give the users the best answer you can. But for fun, I thought I'd hook this up to the prompt API, and we'd give it a try together. I want to say I'm living very dangerously here. So I'm running in Chrome Canary, which is already experimental and can break at any time. I'm also using this experimental API, which is experimental and can break at any time. So hopefully this is going to work, but I need you all to cross your fingers for me. So we'll start with a simple question. So maybe just we'll say, like, what's your favorite color? And if I type that correctly, you can see it takes a second. It's going to that model that's running on my device. And we get a nice response. My favorite color is blue. It's calming and peaceful color. It reminds me of the ocean. And this is all being generated by that on-device model. No data is going to the server. So that's really cool. I can go ahead and click regenerate here. And actually, it's suggesting that I do something else. It's saying that I should open the developer tools. So maybe that's where we should go next in this talk. So I'm going to go ahead and open developer tools. And you can see that actually here we have this more slides section. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you see we have more slides. And this is actually using an ability that extensions have to show UI directly in DevTools. And this is something that I think not many people know about and is really underutilized. So you can actually build developer tooling that you ship as part of an extension that your developers building with your product can use. So this is often used by like React developer tools and other frameworks so that they can provide better support for their framework within Chrome. But if you're building any sort of product that developers would use, you could also build your own developer tools and put them directly in DevTools. Again, this is really simple to register. So instead of those pop-up keys, we're just saying devtools_page and then providing an HTML page that's included in our extensions directory. This actually isn't the page that's directly rendered. This is sort of a coordinating page which is invisible and running in the background. And then within that page, we can ask to show particular panels or UI within DevTools. So the way I'm doing this is calling this chrome.devtools.panels.create API. And this is saying that my extension would like to add a new panel to DevTools. And in this case, I'm adding this devtools_panel.html file. And that's what you're actually seeing here. So all of these slides are just in that panel.html file. One really cool use of this that I saw is extensions have access to some special storage APIs. So you might know that websites have access to like local storage or IndexedDB. Extensions have access to their own storage APIs. And for a long time, we didn't have support for those in DevTools. So you couldn't easily inspect the data in storage. You had to sort of run commands in the console. It wasn't ideal. And so what developers did is actually built their own extensions that added panels to DevTools to expose that data. And so that was a really nice case where developers were able to sort of fill in a gap and address a use case that they had for DevTools by building their own extension. And in that case, we actually saw this makes loads of sense. I don't know why this isn't in DevTools already. So this is something which we added to DevTools in Chrome 132, which I think is currently in beta and shipping to stable in the new year. So we now actually have gone from something that was prototyped in an extension to something that is shipping as a feature within the browser. And there are other APIs that you can use. So here I've showed you sort of adding an entirely new panel. And this is not using any of the UI that's already in DevTools. But extensions have access to a whole set of special APIs under this chrome.devtools namespace. And within there, they can do other things. They can show UI like within the elements panel. And so they can meet users exactly where they are. And whatever you're building, there's probably a place in DevTools where you could show some helpful UI. So that's all I've got to say for DevTools. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of there. And I want to sort of recap everything that we've seen today. So we've looked at some various contexts that your extension has access to. So extension pages, content scripts, the side panel, the pop-up DevTools panels. Believe it or not, that's actually not all of the APIs that are available to extensions. So there's even more to see. You have options pages, which is where your extension can show additional settings within the Chrome Settings UI, specifically for your extension. So if you want some configuration, maybe your extension needs an API key or has some preferences for the UI layout, you can show all of that in an options page. There's a notifications API. And actually, we have notifications on the web. So this is redundant to some extent, but this also gives you some additional flexibility. So extensions can show notifications in more situations. They have a little bit more control over what text they want to show, whether they want to show an icon along with the notification. And so that API is available. There's also an Omnibox API, which allows your extension to directly include suggestions in the address bar when the user's typing. So maybe if you know that a user is always searching for documentation related to your product, you could build an extension where they can search in the address bar and you'll actually include suggestions from your documentation that's relevant to the user. But that's all I've got for today, so thank you so much for listening.